Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martina Tam.
And this is your host, Martin Friedman.
And I am the co-host, Christin Farmer.
Welcome.
Beautiful.
This is our new crew. Hi, Christin. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Martina.
Hey, Martina.
Hey, Martin.
Hey, Christin. Yeah, here we go. Here we are. All three of us.
Finally, how are you all doing today?
I'm doing really, really well. I'm really filled with gratitude. I'm happy to be here with you all. Happy to dive into today's topic.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. Recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I put an alarm on my phone every day to remind myself to have appreciation, to spend a few moments appreciating everything I have and then doing a little happy dance. So it's really, how we talk about groundwater all the time. It's really transforming my groundwater to be in a place where I don't think about what's wrong, but I'm thinking more and more about what's going right in my life.
I love that. The happy dance. I love it.
It reminds me of you kind of connecting with your inner child, because I feel like that's what I see a lot of happening with Makeba. Is that really like physical expression of emotion, and emotions are felt so fully, right? Like the temper tantrum or the absolute glee. It's just a really deep, full emotion that's just manifested throughout the body. So I think that's a beautiful practice, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's wild that I have to like relearn how to do that, because as your child is teaching you, that's actually a natural state to be in. Mm-hmm. We have to learn how to not be appreciative of everything and feel it in our body. And I think it's a great way to start the conversation. I'm not saying to start it now, because we'll start it in a minute after our intro here, but it's a great way to talk about also what is inner power. Because that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about inner power, and we're going to use that conversation to really, establish the three of us as the new co-hosts, and, for you all to get to know each other a little bit, because I know Christin pretty well now, and Martina, I know you well. So this is an opportunity for us to have that conversation around that inner power that we're born with, that we're taught to lose touch with, and then we spend our time getting back to that inner power again later in life.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Speaking of that inner child, this past week, I woke up and I was just feeling just like that, all of the inner power, so to speak, after writing in my gratitude journal. And I came downstairs for a cup of coffee and just looked up on my screen, and I saw Netflix is like always sort of playing in the background on this TV screen, and there was a movie on there called The Magician's Elephant, and it was an animated movie. And I just sat down and started watching it, and it was like the most fantastic movie I've seen in a long time. And I found myself being like, oh my God, I'm like sitting here just downstairs by myself, waking up in the morning and watching basically a cartoon movie. And it really connected with me on that inner child level. And it was just a very fulfilling feeling and a very uplifting story. So that's how I've sort of reconnected with my inner child this past week.
That's beautiful. How about you, Martina?
Well, I kind of mentioned having Makeba, who I was going to say you're going to be hearing with me today. She's coming on as our fourth co-host. Uh-oh.
Hi.
She's here to say hi. You upset I forgot you?
That's Makeba saying hi to everybody. We're blessed. I know Martina went on mute, Christin, but I feel blessed to have Makeba say hi to us with so much emphasis, so much vim and vigor, as we used to say.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and babies remind us of that. They remind us of that.
Exactly. It's one thing to talk about it. There she is. There's Makeba.
It's something that I so appreciate about Soul Focus Group is that I feel like I'm allowed, I'm given permission to come as my whole self, which really involves, being a mama to a toddler right now, and that it's okay for her to be in this space with us. So I'm grateful to all of you. She's upset about my ear pod. She wants it out of my ear.
The ear pods aren't working for Makeba, huh?
But we're working through it. I think we're kind of working through that, huh, Makeba? So yeah, I feel like I'm constantly being reminded of my inner child and trying to remind myself to let her be a child, right? Like I feel like so often we try to train kids to be not in touch with themselves. Like, oh, don't have the temper tantrum. Don't feel that. Like, shh. There's kind of this, let's be this sort of neutral appearing person in public. And so I think learning to embrace, and like you said, it's okay to show your emotions. It's okay to just to be you. And our job is to let you find a safe space for that. Mm-hmm. So constantly in that space of reminding myself to give her space and give her time to be her to be herself, and help me connect with my inner child.
I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think maybe this is a good time for us to transition, to the conversation around inner power. And when we come back, part of, I think, what today is going to be is, Christin and Martina, for you all to get to know each other a little bit, and for our audience to get to know what the three of us will be like together. So when we come back and we start our segment, we will talk about inner power, how, we're born with it, and forces are at work to get us to not feel our inner power and to convince us that we're powerless. And then here we are in our 30s and 40s and 50s, and me about to be 60 in a minute here. And we're and still working to be in touch with that inner power, that authentic self. So we will be right back.
So have you ever heard of a term called groundwater? Groundwater is another word we use at the Soul Focus Group that means subconscious programming. From the ages of 0 to 7, we are subconsciously programmed. So much information and choices and decisions are downloaded into our subconscious mind, and we begin to start living that life. And even though that life we're living is not the life we chose for ourselves, and it's not until we understand the impact of the groundwater, what the groundwater really is, that we begin to wake up to our own lives and begin to choose what we want for ourselves. At the Soul Focus Group, we bring you to that consciousness so that you can begin to choose the life you want to live for yourself.
All right. So I really enjoyed our conversation during the intro, and it really got my brain working mostly around this idea of, the power that we're born with. Christin, I would love for you to talk a little bit more. And I think, maybe Martina can learn a little bit more about you, and our audience can learn a little bit more about you. But when you and I did that Get to Know You episode, you talked about a nonprofit that you had, birthing beautiful communities, right?
Yes.
So to me, if you're talking about birthing beautiful communities, you're really talking about having communities realize their inner power, and, that power that you're born with. You're assisting in birth. And then you're also, you mentioned in our pre-conversation that idea is expanded beyond just the actual act of birth. So maybe kick us off a little bit by talking about how you see inner power relating to the idea of birthing and building beautiful communities.
Yes. I really think, I should actually say, I really know at this point in time in my journey that in order to birth beautiful communities, we have to birth the most beautiful version of ourselves as individuals, because as individuals, we make up communities. And giving birth to the most beautiful version of yourself really is you giving life to the inner power that exists within you. And throughout our lives, we have seen our power be diminished. We have seen our power diminish by the subconscious programming that we receive at birth. And I know in the Soul Focus Group, we talk a lot about subconscious programming, but lately it's really, really been on my heart to truly, truly understand what that means. And I actually just published an article yesterday speaking about these acquired and ascribed subconscious programs that we have. And so those ascribed programs come to us when we are born, and that could be through our race or through our gender or through our family's religion and other things that our family, such as our environment or our neighborhood or our community, these are subconscious programs that are ascribed to us. And then as we get older, we volunteer ourselves to other subconscious programs, and those are these acquired subconscious programs. And we can take the program of being a mother or a father or a friend or an employee, a coworker, a boss. And these things are a part of our identity. It's not who we are at our source, at our core, but we believe it is because our world is conditioned to understand these identities to make up who we are. And sometimes we don't really realize the point of demarcation between who we are as our soulful selves and then the identities or the subconscious programs that we have assigned to us or has been ascribed to us. And within that, we get lost. And so our inner power is diminished a lot of times because then we're trying to live up to whatever these programs say that you should do and you should be and you should act. And we end up following those programs as opposed to following our soul source, our inner power. And sometimes it takes a what I call tower moments in our lives, which are these unexpected events in our lives. It could be a loss, whether that's the loss of a family member, or it could be losing a job. It could be going through a breakup. It's really not until we experience these life altering experiences that it shakes our world up to the degree that we have to then look at ourselves and sort of reevaluate who we were and then who we desire to become. And that is us giving birth to a new version of ourselves, not necessarily the most beautiful version of ourselves, but certainly increasing our level of consciousness, or hopefully. Sometimes it doesn't go that way. Sometimes people experience these events and it actually drives them further into those programs as opposed to their soul source or to that inner power, so to speak. So I think that a part of my journey myself, I was putting a lot of emphasis on building communities or birthing beautiful communities, which then led me into having to interact with a lot of different systems, which for me, I wanted to preserve the sanctity of birth, which is a normal, natural process. And so having to interact with so many women and families, there was always the common denominator that women really just wanted to be supported and they really wanted to be a part of something and to feel loved. And a part of how I was structuring the program was to hit at that. But there was so much that I hadn't understood at that point in time in my own journey because I hadn't yet gave birth to the most beautiful version of myself. And so at some point 2 years ago, actually this month, I decided to take a step back from birthing beautiful communities and all of nonprofit so that I could discover myself and give birth to the most beautiful version of myself. So then I could then in turn be a demonstration and create the space for others to give birth to the most beautiful versions of themselves, also known as reclaiming that inner power so they can stand in their truth outside of those identities or outside of those subconscious programs so that they are leading a life that is the most fulfilling for them and whatever that version of themselves that they desire to become. they are able to do that because they believe that they can and they know that they can. And I think that that is really the foundation of the inner power, is knowing and believing that you can be and have and do whatever it is that you desire to do on this earth as a human or as a spiritual being having a human experience.
Wow, Christin, that's so beautiful. You said so much there. And I have a lot of follow-up questions, but the first one, I'm wondering if you're open to sharing with us a little bit more, as I think, just like you said, so many of us were trained to think of ourselves only within these definitions. Like you said, whether it's our race, our gender, our job, our familial role. And I think for a lot of us, and I know for myself included, it can be really hard to start to understand, who am I outside of these roles, these titles that I have? And so I'm curious for you, as you've gone through this process and you're still on this journey these last few years to birth the most beautiful you, the most authentic you, what have been some of the practices for you that have helped you rediscover that inner power apart from the titles and labels that we have?
Thank you. That's a really good question. It has certainly evolved over time. I think that at the beginning, I was very frightened. It was like I was afraid to step away from the life that I knew was no longer serving me, because I did not know what was coming up ahead. And I had to pray a lot, and I had to follow my inner being, which was guiding me. And I had to trust my inner being, because at that point in time, I really didn't have a choice. It was like I knew I couldn't continue to exist the way that I had been existing. But if I leave this life behind, I'm at the peak of my career at this point in time. I've raised millions of dollars. Not only am I the founder, but I'm also the president. I'm the CEO. I had just expanded to Akron. I had just raised the first $1 million for the birthing center that I had been talking about bringing to Cleveland for years. I had did all of these things. I had just wrote $1 million plus grant that we just received from the state to create these 2 apps. And so here I am from the outside world at the top of my game in my career. And then I suddenly turned around and said, you know what? Nope, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And people, of course, are looking at me like I was crazy. Like, what do you mean you don't want to do this anymore? And it was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's almost like Forrest Gump when he was running and he just kept running. He kept running. And then one day he just stopped. He was like, I'm done. And that was just it. Right. And so I had to create space for myself to get to know myself, because up until that time I was running on purely subconscious programming. I was running on the subconscious programming of the founder and the president and the CEO and the leader and the community leader, to be specific. But who is Christin? Okay, that's what people see me as. And that's nice, I suppose, the recognition and all of the awards and being flown around the world to do these speeches, but that wasn't fulfillment. There was still something that was misaligned with who I was becoming and where I was headed. And pumping the brakes to say, you know what? I don't know what's going on with me, but I got to take some space, because I need to figure out what is going on with me, because I can't serve anyone at the highest capacity if I am unable to see myself for who I truly, truly am. And so that took a lot of courage for me to step back. And when we do make the decision to be 100% on our side, which is what I learned in Self Focus Group, that is a very risky thing. And it shouldn't be. The fact that we are constantly trying to rationalize choosing ourselves over everyone and everything else speaks to how deep this subconscious programming runs for us. that we are afraid that we will lose the titles, or that we will lose the money, or that we will lose the respect, or we will lose all of these things that are really just an illusion, because we create our reality. And so if you can create that, then you can create again, but through a more authentic framework. And even though I didn't know what that necessarily meant at that time, the first thing I had to do was really step out on faith and start to trust the things that I claimed I believed. And so we say that we believe a lot of things, but when it comes down to it, most of us don't really believe it because we aren't willing to even test it. And because we aren't really willing to test it, then we never find out who we actually truly are, because we're too afraid to find out who we actually truly are. And we're too afraid to find our inner power. And so the evolution of that has been praying and taking a risk, but also a whole lot of lessons. I had a bunch of tower moments in these last 2 years that spawned these epiphanies and revelations for me, because I was asking for clarity. I was asking to align myself with who I truly am, so that I can give myself to myself, but to serve people, because I'm under the thinking or the thought and belief that the rent we pay as humans to be on this earth is in the service that we give to others. That's my belief. And I wanted to make sure that I was serving from an authentic place. It has since evolved to what I shared earlier, is me writing in my gratitude journal every single day, me listening to subconscious deprogramming, I should say, while I'm asleep. I listen to YouTube and different channels that helps me to deprogram my subconscious mind and to reprogram my subconscious mind with more affirming, more a positive thoughts and beliefs that allow me to let go of things that I may have been holding on to that maybe I don't know about. I say affirming words and affirming questions in the morning, at night. And it's so powerful that when we can replace those subconscious programs that no longer serve us with the subconscious programs that are serving who we are becoming, then it's really a game changer, because then we are committed to becoming the most beautiful versions of ourselves, sometimes even if we can't see that yet. And so a lot of it is trusting that process and knowing, not the thinking, but the knowing that there is better on that other side, even if we don't know what that other side looks like yet.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And the kind of three things I was hearing when I take away is kind of what I was visualizing as almost like this cycle is, first off, you talked about that fear, like that fear of letting go of the titles, almost like this fear of losing our identity. It made me think a lot about how we ask kids, like, I feel like a common question is like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, we focus so much on these external things like professions and all these titles. We're already programming them to think about that as their identity. And so, of course, it makes sense that we fear when we step away from those. And then I heard you talk about courage, having the courage to begin this journey. And I really, something that really resonated with me that you said was trusting. I hope I heard you right. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christin, but I heard it was trusting in the tools you already say you believe in, but truly now using them and trusting them.
Yes, that's correct.
And that really resonated with me, because I feel like there's a lot that I know in my life I say I believe and I say I do, but how often am I actually fully trusting in those things? And what a leap of courage that is to actually do that.
And it's a repetitive process. It's something that I sort of, the analogy that I think about it is like, and you see a window and you pick up a rock and you throw the rock at the window. It might not actually crack the window or go through the window first, but the first time you throw it at the window at the same spot, it will crack it. The second time you throw it at the window, it'll crack it a little bit more. The third time you throw it some more until it finally goes through and busts the whole window, right? Like, you have to keep practicing at it until it just becomes ingrained in you. And when we look at babies, and I compare everything to babies because we, for one, we're all babies and we still have that in us. And it's like a baby when a baby is learning to walk. When the baby falls the first, second, third time, the baby doesn't say, oh, you know what? I think this walking thing isn't for me. I'm just going to stop here, right? The baby will continue to get up and try and try and try, will persist until it's stable enough to walk on its own. And we are still those babies in every dimension of our existence on this earth. We have to just keep at it until we do it enough to where it just becomes second nature to us. See, we've had a lot of practice in these subconscious programs, which is why it feels like it runs on autopilot. But we also have the inner power to replace those subconscious programs with those that actually serve us. Because, for example, it's not about our title or our education level or status. That's what the world or society says is important. But what's important is why you do what you do. Because if you follow your why, you follow your purpose, you follow your cheese, I'm referring to the book, Who Moved My Cheese, then you will always be fulfilled in the work that you choose to do because it's coming from your inner power. It's not coming from a title or the number of degrees that you have or being a boss or something like that. It's coming from the inner power. And that will keep you working, so to speak, the work you love for the rest of your life.
At the Soul Focus Group, we're probably one of the first organizations in the social justice movement to find ourselves moving away from fighting against racism to creating human solidarity. What we found is that we could fight 24 hours, 48 hours, or all our lives, and after fighting all this time, we have nothing to show for it. It's because we haven't created anything for ourselves. At the Soul Focus Group, we are one of the few organizations who have moved from fighting against racism to creating an alternative to racism. And we invite you to join us. Let's stop fighting and start creating the outcome we really want to experience.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Christin, and thanks for, those great questions. You all both have me thinking about a lot of stuff right now, and how to keep that inner power even when there's a lot of forces that tell us, that we're actually powerless. And I'm wondering, Martina, like, how do you see that play out in terms of your life, like especially in the healthcare field and, what you do on a daily basis? How do you see what Christin is talking about manifesting in your world?
Oh yeah, gosh, that's a great question, Martin. I think in so many ways, both personally and then in my work. I mean, I think I'm sure, I feel like, Martin, we've talked about this, and Christin, I wonder if you've experienced the same. It sounds like from what you've shared, it's been similar of when we have jobs that can be emotionally or very time consuming, or things you've spent a lot of time to get to a certain point. I feel like it becomes even more consuming, that for me at least, that a job becomes a big part of my identity. I tried to not have being a physician be a big part of my identity. And I think especially in the last few years, that's become easier because I'm not spending as much time working. But it's a huge part of, I think, the struggle that I have of who am I and who am I separate from my job? Because kind of like you were saying, Christin, there's that service part in work. And I loved how you said that and phrased it, sort of paying our rent on this earth is in service, doing service for others. But then how do I find myself apart from this job, even though service is a big part of why I think we're on this earth and building community through that. I think another thing, and Christin, I feel like this might relate to your work, in the doula training and building up doula services. And I always think it's so funny how we say, like, oh, I delivered a baby. Because really, as a physician or as a birth attendant, there's not a whole lot that I did, right? Today I saw a mom and baby, and I was there for their delivery. I took care of mom during her pregnancy, and baby's now 6 months old. And, the mom was so sweet and was like, of course she loves you. Like, you brought her into this world. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I was simply there. I literally just helped to catch her so she didn't fall on the ground. And you did you and her did the work, right? And I think it's something that I see a lot in our medical system, where we are taking people's power away from them and having them rely on external things for their health and their well-being. So birth is an example, right? I delivered a baby. I did this, I did that. When in reality, we are birth attendants, right? We're there as supports, but mom and baby are doing the work. And I saw that as something that's so internalized, right? When patients are like, oh, you delivered my baby. I think in many other ways, I see that reliance on medicines, right? The majority of the illnesses and diseases that I see and that I'm treating could be completely cured, with access to lifestyle changes. And there's so many social factors that play into that, and limited access. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But I think our healthcare system has made it so that we are so reliant on something external to us. We only think through a pill, can I heal myself? Or can I be healed, right? And I think that for me is a part of medicine that is so harmful and disempowering to our communities. And when I compare it to, for example, Chinese medicine and my experiences with people in China and sort of a lot of Chinese culture, especially traditional Chinese culture, is there's so much cultural knowledge of how to heal ourselves through food, through exercise. And I think that's a lot of what our allopathic medicine has, I think, purposely moved us away from, right? To keep the power within sources external from us.
Thank you for that, Martina. And I wanted to ask a question around, do you believe that physicians are aware that people have their own inner power to heal themselves, but maybe they move forward with, I don't know, prescribing or to that degree, because either they know or think that people don't realize their own inner power? And not saying that it's easier to prescribe medication, but maybe it is. Is it easier to prescribe medication than it is to convince someone of their own power, their own inner power?
That is such a good question. I think, so it's so interesting. What you made me think about is that, so first off, yes, it is so much easier to prescribe a medicine. You just type it in the computer and hit send, right? It's really easy, shockingly easy. But I think also as a physician, I know for me is I have felt disempowered because I felt like I'm just the middle person for these drug companies, because all I can actually do is prescribe a pill, right? The system has it set up so I have a 15-minute visit. How am I in 15 minutes going to talk with you about changing lifestyle, nutrition, when the hours of nutrition education that physicians get in 99% of medical schools is zero? I've got zero instruction in all of my medical training on nutrition. So I don't know. So I feel like a huge issue, and again, I think this was purposely done in our medical system, is to disempower physicians, to make us feel reliant on a pill. And so many people, I think, go into the healthcare field with the hopes of doing service, the hopes of helping people in some way. And then when you come out and you realize, gosh, all I can do is prescribe medicines, that feels really disempowering. And so I think that a huge part is also helping healthcare providers understand our own power as human beings, right? As human beings, our own power to connect with people. And even just through human connection, helping people find their inner power. I think there's also a huge element of healing through touch that, I was not taught in allopathic medical school. And it's something that I really learned more through acupuncture. And, now at my job, I get to practice acupuncture, and is a huge part of why I feel joy in going to work, because I feel like I'm able to connect with my own actual healing powers and energy in a very tangible way when I'm doing acupuncture for my patients. So I think that's one piece, is that healthcare providers, I think, have been purposely disempowered. And then the other piece, I think, is sort of this, I think there's kind of a falsehood that we have been made to believe that if somebody is in some kind of social turmoil, they don't have the ability to connect with their power. And I feel like I hear that a lot from physicians working in communities that have been historically and purposely marginalized is, oh, well, gosh, if I could get you access to healthy food and more time and more money, then yes, we could help all of these chronic conditions, but that's just too hard, so I'm just going to prescribe you a pill. And yes, those are absolutely barriers, and those are elements of what a lot of our patients face, and we can't ignore that piece. And I think for us to dismiss that because you're poor, you can't connect with your power and you don't have the ability to find health on your own, I think is a huge problem that we have. And how do we move away from that, kind of just saying, well, that's the excuse why we can't do more, and because you don't have access to resources, that's it.
I love so much of what you laid out. I think that it always surprises me, and maybe it shouldn't surprise me, but I feel like we are in this box and we just keep running around this box, and then a new box appears. So then we get in that box, and then we're just running around in the box. But the boxes are both made the same. So we essentially are just still doing the same thing. And being away for 2 years and from the system, so to speak, and when I reemerged, when I got back on LinkedIn and people had started adding me back, so I started to see the news feed, and all I could think was like, oh my God, it's like a time capsule. Like nothing has changed. Like people are still talking about and trying to do things the same way when I was in these certain spaces 2 years prior. And I guess the question is, what keeps us from realizing our inner power? And yeah, that's the question. What keeps us from realizing our inner power so that we are able to actually progress and solve for some of these things that we claim are issues, such as what you just laid out, especially that social piece. And it's sort of this, oh, well, we're so sorry. You don't have any inner power. So here, we'll supplement it in this way. But how helpful is that? But the question is, what's keeping us from realizing our inner power? And how do we move past that?
Christin, I think that's an amazing question. And just, really listening to both of you talk, it always brings me back to this thing we talk about all the time at Soul Focus Group and on these podcast episodes, that, we spend a lot of time trying to control things we can't control, and very little time is spent on controlling what we can control. And so when I think about inner power and like the social stuff that you all are talking about, all the external factors, so we can't control the external factors, but to me, what inner power is at its core is us controlling our response to those external factors, because that's really where our power lies. Our power doesn't lie in trying to change something or someone externally. Our power lies in us knowing that we can enact the change on ourselves that we want to see. What's the old saying? I forget, be the change you want to see. And probably for a lot of people that might seem sort of old and tired and cliche, but I think it's actually really relevant, because that is really what we have to be. So I think what inner power is, and the reason why we haven't been exercising our inner powers because we've been convinced that we don't have it. The world has been telling us our whole lives that we're powerless. And, I know that, we're going to wrap up this episode, but I know in episodes coming up, we're going to continue this theme a lot in different ways, because the world is going to treat us the way the world's going to treat us. But we get to respond. We get to choose how we respond. And as I said earlier, most of us as adults, we have forgotten that. We no longer believe that. We believe that we have to respond in certain ways. And that to me is being out of our inner power. When we talk a lot about it at Soul Focus Group about being out of our power. And to me, that's what it means. It means being disconnected from the true inner power that we have and focusing on external power. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're in the mess that we're in right now.
That was so beautifully said, Martin and Christin. Wow, gosh, such a good question. I think that, gosh, there's so many reasons I see that we're not finding or reconnecting with our inner power. What's keeping us from it? I think there's so many myths that we've been taught to believe, like myths that I don't have time, myths, and both of you mentioned even just taking a little bit of time, whether it's the gratitude journal or Martin setting the alarm, that even those small moments help connect us with our inner power. And there's this lyric from, I don't know if y'all know the Blue Scholars. They were in Seattle, like a Seattle hip hop group. Martin, do you know them from when you were in Seattle?
Absolutely. I know the Blue Scholars. I met at least one of their members. Yep. Yeah.
So there's a lyric where he says, if you have time to take a shit, you have time to read a book.
Mm-mm.
And so
Nice.
There's a lot of myths, right, about us not having time. And I know that's for me at least a big thing that I am struggling with, is this feeling that I don't have time. And so making that as an excuse to why I don't work on trying to break those habits of the subconscious programming.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to make jokes about the analogy that you just used, because I think, we could do a whole podcast episode on, on our bathroom habits. Some of us probably could just read like a children's book, and some of us could read War and Peace, but we won't get into that now. So I would just say that this, again, like returning to our inner power is us convincing ourselves that we actually do have power, and us no longer believing all the external messages that we're powerless to change anything. And it's a return. It's nothing new, but it's just a return to a knowing of what we actually have. And, it's not about age. I think it's about level of awareness and learning. So I think people can do it in their teens, and some people will die in their 90s, never having done it, never having returned to understand that you have power. I've mentioned this a lot in the solo episode I did was on the emotional and spiritual healing I've done with my mom. And, one of the gifts of spending so much time with her while she's been in the hospital and rehabs over this last year has been for me to see like her groundwater that's become my groundwater. And there's so much negativity that I've inherited, and in thinking that nothing's ever going to work out, that things are always going to end poorly. This is a constant monologue for her. And actually, one of the amazing things is she's 91, and as I said on the podcast episode that's going to be released, she's actually like reading the book Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, where she's like willing to, like, probably for the first time in her life, willing to realize that maybe she hasn't been in the power of now. Because part of the inner power is like the power of being in the moment and not being in the past and not being in the future. And she has spent most of her life being in the past and in the future. And, she has embraced reading the book, and it's so hopeful to me because, while I still see so much of that prevalent groundwater in her that I also internalized, I also see her even at 91 being willing to shift that. And that's so hopeful for me, because it just lets me see that it's really, I know it's so cliche to say, but it really is never too late to change. And I mentioned this last week, but also she made it really clear to me that if she had read this book even 5 or 10 years ago, it probably wouldn't have had the same impact on her. She probably wouldn't have been able to absorb it and embrace it as she has. So it's just amazing to think about that we can get in touch with that inner power at any point in our lives.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That gives me so much inspiration and hope. Like it really, truly does. Because I recently went through this whole phase of people don't change. They are who they are. The only way that people change is this and that. But this past week has been such an epiphany for me. And what you just said just affirmed it for me. Because not only do we have inner power, our inner power is so strong that we have the power to affect change in others. If we are able to see others as their most beautiful selves, if we just imagine them as their most beautiful selves, that's that mustard seed of faith. Because maybe they don't have that mustard seed of faith within themselves to see themselves change. But if we have the mustard seed of faith to see the change within them, then even our power and our visualization and imagination can affect that person. And we don't even have to be in close proximity with them because we are so interconnected to everything on this planet that our power has the ability to transfer to others. And that's what inspiration is. Inspiration is seeing something powerful and it tapping on your power and sort of waking you up to a degree that moves you to do something or say something or create something. And everything that we do has the power to affect people in the most positive way. So I am so delighted to hear that, Martin, about your mom. I love that.
Thank you, Christin. Yeah, it's been incredible. It's been so challenging at times, this whole process, and it's been amazing at times. When I brought it up to her, the fact that she said, okay, and then I went to Barnes and Noble the next day. First of all, the fact that you can actually go to a bookstore and buy a book that you want to buy, that was just incredible in and of itself. So I knew the universe wanted us to have that experience. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a great note for us to end on, is that inner power is not selfish, that as we realize our inner power, it actually becomes a collective act as we realize our inner power together. So thank you for sharing that. Martina, is there anything you want to add before we close this out?
Just that shared feeling of inspiration, and even I think reflecting what Christin was saying, that your mom being so open now for change, for growth, and you sharing that, it's affecting me. And I'm sure that positive energy is going to just have ripple effect also with our listeners. And so just kind of really manifest what Christin was saying about our human connectedness.
Awesome.
When you come to the Soul Focus Group, you come to an acknowledgement that there has been injuries done to us from all these different forms of oppression. Injuries that have impacted our subconscious mind, our heart, our spirit, our very soul. So at the Soul Focus Group, we recognize that and we focus on healing. Healing, the return or the recovery of our connections to our healthy self, our beautiful thinking mind. We want you to come join us in a movement of healing all around the world to restore us back to our rightful state. At the Soul Focus Group, we heal.
Well, we did it. We recorded an episode with all three of us, the new era Soul Focused Radio podcast hosts. How did it feel to you all?
I had a great time. I always love having conversations within the Soul Focus Group. It always enlightens me in some way. I love to share in connectivity with my fellow humans. So always a pleasure to be included in this process. So thank you.
Oh, it was so good to be back at the podcast, and Christin, to get to, quote unquote, meet you virtually. Like I mentioned in the podcast, I feel like my big struggle is time, feeling like I don't have time and feeling pressure around time. But after we record our podcast, I'm always so grateful because I feel calmer. I feel more connected to myself, and I feel more hopeful. So thank you both for that.
Thank you, Martina. Welcome back. We'll leave a little cliffhanger, a little teaser for our audience. But next episode, one of the next episodes or two, you're going to share an amazing experience that you had traveling across the world over this last couple of months. So we're gonna do a tease. They call that in the radio business. They call that a tease. So tune in next week to hear about Martina's adventure. All right, everybody. Well, thank you, Christin and Martina. This was awesome. I also enjoyed myself. And we just want to say to all of our listeners, we are so thankful that you came on this journey with us, that you're on this journey with us, that you listened today, and that you are working on your inner power, because we know you are. If you didn't care about your inner power, you would not be tuned in to the Soul Focus Group and Soul Focus Radio. So know that we love you, know that we care about you. Please go to soulfocusgroup.com. It's an entirely new website. It's awesome. We're adding new things every day. Join us, share us with everybody that you know, like us, subscribe to us, help us grow our community, help us grow our beloved and beautiful community. So with that, as always, Christin and Martina, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for listening. We ask that each and every one of you stays safe, stays well, and most of all, stay soul focused.